There is no small debate in the community of Helldivers 2 on which armor is the best. So I tried to put together this video to answer that question once and for all, and as I was doing this experiment, I realized this question's near impossible to answer, but I'm going to try. And the reason why it's near impossible is because what does best mean? Not to mention there's so many factors that you can put in here that it's just, there's no way to directly compare everything. For example, if you prefer the 2 grenade armor, there are legitimately times where having extra grenades would be life-saving that you wouldn't have that life if you didn't have those extra 2 grenades. The same argument can be made for speed, it can be made for having extra stims, it can be made for extra throwing range. It's just so abstract, there's no good way to compare them all. So what I did was I wore one of each armor, including Democracy Protects, because that's almost like its own armor, and just ran into a bug hole and see how long can I survive. Now in theory, the heavy armor should win out no matter what for this because it has the most armor. What this should prove is how long you can survive taking a ton of damage, and whether or not wearing different armors is worth it. For example, if light armor and medium armor only gives you 1 more second of life, that's not really worth it. Whereas if heavy armor compared to light armor gives you say 30 seconds of extra life, that might be worth it. And again, this is not factoring in all those extras, this is just purely does the extra armor from heavy armor make that big of a difference as compared to something as light armor. Without further ado, here's the experiment. So we're going to start with light armor, and again, we're just running directly into a hive. I'm not going to try and do much to survive here, we got 3 seconds on the first time. I will note that I am trying to use stims, as stims obviously are a part of the game. However, many times I did not even have the opportunity to use a stim as I was going down so fast when taking heavy damage surrounded by enemies that it wasn't even a factor. A little under 3 seconds for that one. This time I landed a little too far away. As you know, Hellpods are a little finicky sometimes, so the timers aren't perfect. This isn't a super scientific experiment. I'm only human, so please forgive me for a few little glitches here and there. This one I put at just under 2 seconds once I started taking damage, or excuse me, under 3 seconds once I started taking damage. And once again, we land in the thick of it, and we're not going to last more than 3 or 4 seconds here. Timer started a little bit late, but that one I would still put at about 3 or 4 seconds. And again, here I'm not factoring in speed. We know that if you were wearing light armor, you're probably not going to be running into enemy territory like this. You're going to be outrunning them. You're going to be taking light damage, maybe from hunters jumping at you. But the idea was to see whether or not the light armor made that big of a difference compared to medium or heavy armor when it came to actual damage. Now we are going to swap over into medium armor. Now this one I only cut halfway through and I jumped to a different mission. This is because a Bile Titan spawned on this one and I didn't know whether or not the Bile Titan would be fair play for this experiment since Bile Titans pretty much one-shot everyone. And you can see here we did last double the length, almost 7 seconds, even with a Bile Titan in play. I think that gives fairly good evidence, even though it was just one time, that medium armor at least does offer more protection than light armor, pretty guaranteed. It pretty much gave us double the life. Here, about 7 seconds, again, 6-7 seconds, as compared to the 3-4 seconds, we're getting double the amount of time on the field in medium armor in the worst possible circumstances, with a Bile Titan stomping around, hitting you, spewing at you, all those sort of things. Here I stopped the timer, started again, so it's not going to be super accurate, but I did manage to get some stims off, and if I hadn't got hit by a Bile Titan leg there, I think I would have survived even longer. So the medium armor as compared to the light armor does give you more chances to stim, and does keep you in the battle a little bit longer. So I definitely do think that there is a noticeable difference from light armor to medium armor. As promised, we jumped to a different mission to see if it would make a difference whether or not you're having a Bile Titan on you. Here we got a whole bunch of chargers, but this time about 10 seconds, 11 seconds. That could have also been due to terrain, but I'm not going to rule that out because, again, terrain is a part of it as well. And glitchy enemies, of course, has been a part of Helldivers since day one as well. Here we did not last nearly as long, about 3 seconds, because we landed in the thick of it. So if you're completely surrounded, you're about as reliable as having light armor on. And in this one, again, we land in the thick of it, but you can still see we last for about 5 seconds, 4 to 5 seconds. So there is still a noted difference from that landing, which is terrible right in the middle of things, and the same thing with light armor. So as you would expect, you do get a little bit more life out of having on the medium armor as compared to light armor. That's what we are anticipating, that's what we're getting, so that makes sense. It's not a huge difference, but a few seconds does make a difference, especially for, as we saw previously, getting those stims off. If you can manage to get a stim off and you're not getting bile tightened, it makes a huge difference. Next up is Democracy Protects armor that we'll be looking at, and I wanted to look at the Democracy Protects armor because I consider it its own category, even though it is technically medium armor. Because of its special ability, it can of course outlast anything else. It's pretty incredible, so I want to give that a try. Now, when I started using Democracy Protects armor, I did not expect much of a difference, and my initial data was telling me, yep, not much of a difference. You died in 3 seconds. That's worse than the other medium armor, and pretty much the same as light armor. Now, these stats might have been slightly changed because of chargers running and knocking me around, and that gives you a little bit of extra time. However, that is also part of the Democracy Protects armor, right? It gets knocked around, you survive. So there was 10 seconds there with that one, and I think this life we will go about 18 to 20 seconds, if not more, because of a combination of being able to get some stims off, Democracy Protects, and good old-fashioned ragdolling, which again I'm not ruling out because that happens a ton in games, and ragdolling is kind of a legitimate strategy for staying alive. So that Democracy Protect was putting in the work here, along with those stims. As you can see, we're absolutely surrounded, getting crushed, but we make it past the 20-second mark for the first time. Heavy armor, same deal as before. Because there was a Bile Titan, I did move areas eventually during this because I felt that the Bile Titan might be messing up the data. Here though, we see that heavy armor heavily featured, doing what it does best, which is ignoring all those small guys, ignoring that charger hitting you. That heavy armor is going and going and going, and even matching the Democracy Protects almost at about 18 seconds. Pretty impressive, especially when you compare it to the other armors that were averaging 3 seconds and 7 seconds. Now, there is another part to note here, which is these are much smaller enemies than the other data, so we do need to move areas to get other factors in as well. But once again, we are able to reliably get stims off. You can see there's some stalkers in here as well, and we die at about 11 seconds. So let's swap areas here because those Bile Titans might be ruining the data. Here's some Brood Commanders, some Chargers, just as bad as before. As you can see, once again, though, we are getting those stims off, and that is the biggest difference we have here. Reliably, heavy armor gives us the chance to get our stims off and last a longer period of time. 13 seconds here, not quite as impressive as the 20 seconds with Democracy Protects, but still solid. Last life here as we go into it. We've got the timer counting down, and a Brood Commander comes right on us, and that is going to mess everything up because even with Brood Commanders on us, we only lasted 7 seconds, which puts us right around medium armor with the worst of the worst right on top of us. So what can we learn from this data? Well, there's a couple things I think are worth noting here, and that is it performed about as expected. Light armor had the least amount of time. Medium armor kind of gave us a little bit more than light armor, and heavy armor gave us obviously the most amount of time of just taking solid damage, like the most damage possible. And that's what we were expecting. That's what you'd predict, right? You'd say, okay, light armor has the least armor, medium armor is medium, and heavy is heavy, right? That makes sense, and those numbers make sense. So the question we have to ask ourselves when looking at that is the extra 2 seconds that medium armor gives you worth it? Or is the extra 7 to 15 seconds that heavy armor gives you worth it? And that's what makes the question, what is the best armor, so impossible to answer, because that's going to be different for every person. Again, if you're wearing light armor, chances are you're not going to be running directly into a bug nest, absolutely surrounded and taken down like that, right? And if you're playing with, say, the extra grenades or the extra range, your entire play style is going to be different than running in and charging in like that. So those situations are most likely unlikely. But it is the best way I feel that we could at least get some data on the armor. Because if you start to factor in, okay, well, what if we looked at wearing light armor, medium armor, and heavy armor and seeing how many times you die in a mission? Well, there's so many factors that can influence that, such as being friendly fired, such as having to deal with environmental factors. There's no way to get good data, I feel, unless we got like the data from Arrowhead themselves, like they released all the stats, and that's a big enough sample we might be able to draw conclusions from. So we have to draw conclusions on our own here. And the conclusion you need to be able to draw is sacrificing, say, 10 seconds of life in heavy damage worth it for the speed you get from the lesser armors? Not factoring in, of course, heavy padding, which does mess this up just a little bit. And in my opinion, the answer is yes. Having more speed gives you more survivability, as you won't get in the situations as presented in the scenarios. Not to mention, most enemies won't be able to keep up with you, and you can get behind things like cover when you're fighting the bots where you won't be able to be hit as easily. It's also worth noting that medium armor is a pretty good compromise between the two, especially if you're factoring in the Democracy Protects, which did have the longest life out of everything. So if you're looking for just pure survivability, I think Democracy Protects is the best of the best in just sheer terms of taking damage and not going down, which is its purpose. So that makes sense. You're giving up one of your slots for extra goodies for a little bit more survivability. With all that said, here's my actual opinion to add to the debate. I believe that the light stim armor is the absolute best armor in the game. With the fastest speed, 2 extra stims, and those stims adding extra time to how long they last, combined with the experimental injections, which gives you even more defense, you are near unkillable for I think the math adds up to about 36 seconds. Not including if you're carrying around a supply pack or getting more stims or resupplying. It basically gives you God mode for a half a minute, and nothing else comes close to offering that kind of survivability. But again, I do think there's a solid debate for like the grenade armor, for example. If you're fighting one of the plants that has all the little bile spewers, those grenades can definitely save lives in those moments, and not just your life, but the life of allies, which is also important in the equation. And then you have to throw in the stealth armor where you can say, well, I'm not even going to aggro enemies, so I have the most survivability because I'm not even going to get hit, is also a valid argument. So as I said at the start of this video, I think it's impossible to actually scientifically determine what is the best armor, but hopefully looking at this data will help you to make that decision for your own playstyle and saying, okay, I need to figure out which gives me the most defense survivability for my playstyle. And do I need the maneuverability? Do I need the extras of Democracy Protects? What will help me the most here? And that answer is not going to be the same for two people. As we wind down here, we of course have to go through all the annoying YouTuber stuff, and I apologize, but it does help statistically. So since we're talking about statistics and data, please like and subscribe. It does help me greatly. If there's anything you want to see me experiment, look at, or deep dive into on Helldivers, please leave a comment down below. If you hated this video, also please leave a comment down below, as hater comments do, like everything else, help the algorithm. Thank you so much for watching, and have a blessed day.